Shalom Aleichem. I'll tell you now about what happened today on the 28th of Cheshvan, 90 years ago, in 1929. The Frierdiker Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchok, came to America for almost a year, visiting communities to help the Yidden here strengthen their Yiddishkeit, to help the Anash that was dispersed all over, to strengthen their connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Rebbe, to Lubavitch, and to also raise funds for his brethren who were still in Russia under the communist oppression. On this day, it was decided by the committees of various Chabad Lubavitch shuls, Nusach Ari shuls, in the Brooklyn area of Williamsburg and Bushwick, what's today known as Bushwick. At the time, it was called, I believe, Old Williamsburg, to host the Rebbe, to call a Fabrengen for people to come, and the Rebbe will say a Maamar, and then later the Rebbe will offer Yechidus private audience for people. People can meet him and discuss their issues with him, receive blessings and brachas, etc. So it was today at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 28th of Cheshvan that the Rebbe was going to be at the Temach Tzedek shul at 125 Moore Street, I believe Moore Street in Bushwick. I looked it up. At the time, there were 3 shuls on that block, or within 1 or 2 blocks on Moore Street. One of them was a very large shul called the Temach Tzedek shul. The Rav of the shul was a Lubavitcher Chassid, Rav Menachem Mendlowitz, who was the head of Agudis Chasidei Chabad in America at the time. The Rebbe came and said a Maamar Ani Choma, which is a verse in Shirim. And at the time, Rabbi Jacobson writes in his book, Zikaron Levnei Yisrael, he writes there were 5,000 people in the shul. It was a very large shul, and there wasn't enough place for everyone to come in, so there were several hundred people still outside. And they were waiting for the Rebbe to come, and when the Rebbe came, the police had to make room. It was so pushy and squashy, and they couldn't bring him to the Mizrach, to the head of the shul, to the Bima, to the Aron Kodesh, to the podium. They managed, Rabbi Jacobson writes, to get him just to the Bima in the middle of the shul, and over there he sat down on a chair and he said the Maamar Chasidus. If you look into the Maamar, and I've learned the Maamar and taught the Maamar, and I encourage you to learn the Maamar, it lends itself to a merit, to Judaism, to Yiddishkeit in 1929 in America. He speaks about the Yetzer Hara, he speaks about Kabbalah soil, about Prika soil, about controlling your taivas. He gives them encouragement, he gives them methods and solutions. It's a very uplifting and inspiring Maamar. Interesting that same Maamar, the Frierdiker Rebbe said in the Lubavitcher shul in Riga on Yutes Kislev 1931, and it's printed in the Sefer HaMaimorim Kuntreisim Chelik Aleph, page 440, 442, if you want to look it up over there. But it's the same Maamar that he said a few years before in Williamsburg, in Bushwick. At the time, many, Rabbi Jacobson writes, many Rabbonim, like anyone and anyone and everyone who was a Frum Yid or had a feeling for Tzadikim and the Rebbe and Lubavitch and Yiddishkeit came. I'm convinced that, Reb Shraga Feivel Mendlowitz came at the time with the Talmidim of Torah Vodaas, and many others came to hear the Maamar that the Rebbe said. And later that evening he gave Yechidus. And in fact, he gave Yechidus that night and another night, and he gave it on Worth Street, which wasn't far away, in a certain apartment. Rabbi Jacobson, I believe, gives us the exact address as well. So what we have from this, and the important lesson, is that Williamsburg, which today, Baruch Hashem, is occupied by many Hasidic Yidden and Hasidic groups and Rebbes, and the foremost, the biggest, of course, is the Satmar Hasidic movement, the Satmar Rebbe and his Hasidim. We have to know that Williamsburg was a community before Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, the great tzaddik of Satmar, came to Williamsburg. And in Williamsburg there were many Yidden of all sorts. And the previous Rebbe knew this, and the people in the shuls knew it, so his people arranged for him to be introduced to the community in 1929, 90 years ago, through the reciting and saying of a Maamar Ani Choma. And this gives us the encouragement to continue 90 years later, Tafshin Pei, 2019, to learn this Maamar, to live with this Maamar, and to share the message of this Maamar, and through this we'll have the Geula Shlema.